goes. Oh, I hope that wasn't live.
No. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I will just wait 1 minute or so while we see some more people trickling in, and then we will get started. I see we've already got some feedback in the chat, which is great. Someone says, Don, that they've lived in the Dyckman Valley near Negro since 1960.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, Rob Katz is here, our former intern. Great. Social media is working. Let's see, it's 6:01. I think we'll get started at about 6:02. Don't want to keep anybody who's here on time. Okay, 6:02 is here, so let's get started. I know people are still trickling in, but they can join us when they are able to. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Meredith Horsford. I'm the Executive Director of the Dykeman Farmhouse Museum. We are really excited to continue this series that we first did in August of 2020 and was very successful. This time we're doing a 6-week series during Black History Month, which started last Wednesday. And if you weren't able to join us last week, you can watch the broadcast of that back on our website or on YouTube. So we started last week with Herbert Signoret's discussion on Seneca Village. And each week we will be talking to a different speaker that will touch on a separate unique piece of the New York Black experience, of course, followed by a Q&A. So race has always been an important topic that has influenced our lives historically and in the present. And that is the reason that we began this lecture series last summer. We feel that it is really important to facilitate these conversations with experts, even though sometimes they can be challenging conversations. So each week we will look at the topic of race from a different perspective, similar to our last series when we heard from anthropologists, a historian, and an archaeologist. Our goal for this series has always been to encourage everyone to come together, learn from one another, and to continue the conversation. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping bits of information about the platform that we're using, which is called Crowdcast. There is a chat box located to the right where you can see people are saying hello and where they're from. And that is the place where you should ask any technical questions that Melissa, our development and community engagement manager, can help you with. During the lecture, if you have any questions for the speaker, you'll notice on the bottom center of the screen, there is an Ask a Question button. You can click on that and we will get to those questions either if we can during the talk, but most likely at the end. We also want to thank everyone for attending the event. We feel very strongly that our programming remains free of charge so that it is accessible to all. The response to this lecture series has really been overwhelming, and there is clearly a need for us to talk more about the issues that divide us and the issues that bring us together as Americans. As a small nonprofit organization, we rely heavily on grants and donations to support these programs. This event has been made possible in part with a sponsorship from TD Bank. This series is also made possible in part by funding from the New York Community Trust, a Humanities New York Cares grant with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Federal CARES Act. We are grateful for their contribution that has assisted in the continued success of this lecture series. If you would like to make a donation to help us continue our community-focused programming, it is greatly appreciated. We also will give an opportunity for people to donate at the end of the program.
Could you try again?
Sorry, my watch is talking to me. Gifts in any amount are greatly appreciated. And you can locate the donate button at the bottom of the screen. Another thing we'd like to announce tonight is that we are selling a limited edition shirt that represents the names of the enslaved and free people that lived and worked on the Dykeman farm. Melissa is going to share the link in the chat on the right-hand side of the screen. It's going to show the t-shirt design which has the names of the free and enslaved Blacks who lived on and worked on the Dykeman farm. And also on the back, you're going to see, she just posted it. You'll see the back says "Say Their Names" in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. So to help kick off the campaign, please feel free to click on that link and purchase copious amounts of t-shirts for yourself and for your friends and your family. Also feel free to share the link with anyone that you think might be interested in supporting the cause, and help us reach our goal of selling 300 t-shirts during this lecture series, which ends on March 10th. That's right, Dawn, 300. Proceeds support further research and educational programming on the topic of enslaved and free people represented on the shirt. So tonight we are joined by Mr. Don Rice, a local historian and Dyckman Farmhouse Museum board president. An Uptown resident for over 2 decades, Don has served on the Dyckman Farmhouse Alliance Board since 2014 and as its president since 2017. In 2009, he began hosting a popular series of Uptown history lectures with co-host Cole Thompson, and co-wrote Lost Inwood, released in 2019 by Arcadia Publishing. Over the last 25 years, he has worked in the music departments of over 60 Broadway musicals. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Don Rice, presenting the story of Dyckman Oval, Uptown Manhattan's historic Negro League baseball stadium. Thanks, Don.
Thanks, Meredith. And hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. We're going to talk tonight about a part of Inwood's history that is mostly forgotten, has sort of disappeared from the mainstream history books. And yeah, okay, this is good. Dyckman Oval Stadium. The stadium was built around 1917 and was demolished after 1937, so it lasted till 1938. While Inwood has never had a substantial African-American population, we're not too far from Harlem, and the subway makes it very easy for sports fans to get here. And so Dyckman Oval was really a gathering place for Harlemites, where they could feel separated from the indignities of racialized treatment. This was a stadium, a place of their own to celebrate their own. And the best drawing events and many of the teams here were associated with the Negro Leagues, the Negro National League, number 1 in 1920, and the second Negro National League in 1935. But it was also just a multi-purpose stadium. So you can see along the bottom different events that were held there. Everything from dance contests to baseball and football are what we're going to be talking about tonight. And it runs the gamut from school teams, sandlot teams, business leagues, unions, pro sports, and semi-pro. And the 4 main characters of tonight, well, they're going to be teams, but these are the protagonists, if you will, are John Connors, or John Connor, owner of a New York City team, and then later of the Bronx Giants in Atlantic City. Rube Foster, who formed the first Negro National League in 1920 and brought his team, the Chicago American Giants, to the Dyckman Oval frequently. Alejandro Pompez, who formed the Cuban Stars in 1916 and the New York Cubans in 1935. Major part of our story tonight. And on the football end of things, the first 3 are baseball. On the football end, we have Fritz Pollard, who was the first African-American head coach in the NFL way back in 1921. And from 1935 to 1937, he coached the Brown Bombers at the Dyckman Oval during NFL's ban on Black players. And I just wanted you to see, as I've gone through these newspapers and books and sources and research, I've just come across so many Hall of Fame players who either played or managed at the Dyckman Oval. And all the yellow names are baseball players from the Negro Leagues who are in the Hall of Fame. And we also have some football players. There were some NFL football at the at the Dyckman Oval, not games, but preseasons. And Fritz Pollard also, he's in the Hall of Fame. And crazily enough, a cricket Hall of Famer. We're not going to talk much about cricket tonight. We're not going to talk about cricket tonight, but it was for several years, in the 1930s, 1931, it was the most popular sport at the Oval. So baseball parks where semi-pro black teams played. We're talking about the Dyckman Oval tonight, of course, but it was part of a world of other stadiums. And the stadiums that may come up and mention were obviously Dyckman Oval, the Catholic Protectory Oval in the Bronx, Bronx Oval, Harlem Oval, Olympic or Olympia Field, the Harlem Oval, also known as the Lenox Oval in Harlem, Dexter Park, Hinchliffe Stadium over in New Jersey, which still exists, and there's a landmark there. And Dexter Park has a landmark there too. Those are pictured. So New York Oval and Washington Park. Later, the Polo Grounds, Ebbets Field. But we're talking pretty early in the process of, this is before Jackie Robinson is our talk tonight. So where was the Dyckman Oval? If you're not familiar with Inwood, Inwood is at the very northern tip of North Manhattan, above Harlem, above Washington Heights, but below Kingsbridge. And so you can see on the left where Inwood is, with the star is where the stadium is. And then we can move over and take a look at the right, and we can see that it is a city block bounded by Academy Street and 204th on north and south, and Nagel Avenue and 10th Avenue to the east and west. It's interesting that the Dyckman Oval grew up with Inwood. When the Dyckman Oval was built, only 7,000 or 8,000 people lived in the neighborhood. And by the time the Dyckman Oval was torn down in 1938, there were nearly 50,000 people in the neighborhood. And the population number hasn't moved that much since then. It may be around that now, 55,000. It's not that much. We'll see what the 2020 census tells us. So who owned the Dyckman Oval at first? Well, that's all we're going to do. And after that, the story becomes very complicated. But Isaac Michael Dyckman, who grew up in the Dyckman farmhouse and inherited all of the land, over 250 acres of land that his family had accumulated. Isaac Michael Dyckman, when he died in 1868, his estate was sold. And so almost from river to river, from the Hudson to the Harlem, from below Dyckman Street up to Marble Hill, 4 land auctions were held over the course of 2 or 3 years. And in the second land auction of November 1870, the Dyckman Oval property, where the stadium was going to be built eventually, was sold. And you can see in the blue, within the blue outline, you can count the property lots: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 property lots. 1 was not owned by Dyckman, and all bordering Sherman Creek. And that made it an interesting piece of land because it was inundated by the tides twice a day. Every high tide, you can see along the bottom of the property, the high tide, and that's the water level. That's not the marsh. A lot of the Dyckman Oval land was actually harvested for salt grass, which was a brackish grass that grew in tidal areas. Here we can actually see in this watercolor from around 1890, from right around where the Dyckman Oval was, you can see that the Harlem River is filled with grassy stuff growing out of the water. And that was harvested annually, at least, to use as shipping and packing material, sort of like the bubble wrap of the 1800s. And so people had their own little plots that they would harvest. And the Dyckman Oval was harvested by people who claimed it. And so that was the fact that it was between tides brought up issues of ownership later. So here we can actually see, this is one of the earliest photos of the Dyckman Oval before it was a stadium. And surrounded in yellow, that's our block with the lots. We can see that it's being filled in. And it almost looks like a baseball infield has been created here. And we do know that the Dyckman Oval was used not by people making money, but by neighborhood teams. It was used as early as 1912 and mentioned in the press. So by 1914, we can see that it's being used for baseball probably. That looks like an infield. And by 1917, the Kingsbridge Athletics were ready to lease the whole thing and build a stadium. We can see on the left, they've taken out a lease. Connie Savage has leased the property for his team, the Kingsbridge Athletics he was managing. And then in April, in the New York Sun of 1917, the Dyckman Oval is fenced. The Dyckman Oval has been fenced off and a grandstand built for the coming baseball season. And the inauguration of the new field is scheduled for Sunday, where the home team will meet the Cuban Giants. And then the big advertising factor for the Dyckman Oval's popularity was its convenience to the new subway, just a stone's throw from the Dyckman Street subway station, literally 1 or 2 city blocks. Take the number 1 train from Harlem or anywhere in Manhattan on a subway and get off at Dyckman Street and walk one or 2 blocks and you're at the stadium. So here's the very first team that used the Dyckman Ovals. This is the Kingsbridge Athletics, a semi-professional team made up of several ex-major leaguers. You can see Andy Coakley with his name on it. Andy Coakley was the longtime coach at Columbia, and he was the coach of Lou Gehrig during the short time that Lou Gehrig was at Columbia before joining the Yankees. So this is the team that built the stadium and leased the land for the first time. It's a small ballpark. Until 1935, the left field is only 300 feet. The center field, which is usually longer than the others, it's 265 feet. As a matter of fact, when Babe Ruth played there in 1920, you can read this quote on the lower right. Babe said, "The right field wall of this park was so close that if you didn't knock a line drive to the fielder, you were pretty near bound to bunt a home run." That would change in 1935 when the center field fence was moved back. One thing to keep in mind is that white teams played black teams at this time. Teams themselves weren't integrated, but competition between a white team and a black team was something that was typically and accepted. And here, according to Bill Kerwin's, black teams found money and a sort of a once-a-year racial acceptance if they came to town, played the local white team, won or lost graciously, and then left town with the promise to come back and entertain once again next year. And the attendance for this annual game was often the highest of the year. In New York City, this wasn't a once-a-year appearance. This was a regular appearance, and teams were always playing each other. And in 1917, we have the first appearance by Alex Pompez's team playing at the Dyckman Oval. The team was only a year old, and already the Kingsbridge Athletics have booked this team as perhaps a way to measure their skills. And so you can see the Dykeman subway station is advertised in the ad. Game starts at 1:30. One of the things that is interesting about researching this subject is that and it has made it hard to research until recently with these databases that come online, is that the white press, daily newspapers, mostly ignored events at the Dyckman Oval unless they were events that the white population would want to attend. Boxing matches were often in the Daily News or the New York Times, but very rarely baseball. And the black newspapers were often weeklies, so they're not as many. They only come out once a week. The New York Amsterdam News, the New York Age, the Chicago Defender. But these papers often came out like on Friday or Saturday or Thursday. So last Sunday's game was almost old news. So the reporting is not as extensive as you would get if it were the day after every game. By 1917, here we can actually see some actually Hall of Famers are starting to play at the Oval after their Hall of Fame careers. And this is Albert Bender, who was a Native American elected to the Hall of Fame. But this is an interesting guy because he grew up and went to a school where they were sort of trained to assimilate. Born in Minnesota, mother was Chippewa, and went to the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. So some of the first teams to play, and this is before Rube Foster, the teams here would play local black teams. These are the Grand Central Red Caps. The Red Caps were the workers at the station who helped carry bags and do anything. Would meet people at a train, help with directions, help with anything that was requested. The Red Caps had their own team. So did Penn Station. Here we are. The Red Caps defeat the Kingsbridge Athletics, and then to the right, the Nebraska Indians, a touring Native American team, playing against the National Vaudeville Artists in 1918. Now, the first impresario is Guy Empey. Guy Empey, in 1919, he bought a team, the Maroons. He was a World War I veteran. He bought a team, renamed them the Treatem Roughs, which was a tank division in World War I. And because he was a best-selling author and looking for publicity, he vowed to donate all profits to buy prosthetic limbs for disabled veterans of World War I. And so the very first thing that was happening at the Oval was his team playing various teams for charity. And one of the first teams to arrive was from Cuba, Club Havana, direct from Cuba, playing Guy Empey in July of 1919. And this is sort of the beginning of the Dyckman Oval becoming known as an independent stadium, where there were monopolies of owners who took control of other stadiums. And Dyckman Oval had a reputation, which was key, of being independent. And this started to really catch fire in 1919 when John Connor, who at that time owned the Bacharach Giants, but had lost his team in New York City to Nat Strong several years before. And from 1914 to 1919, no black clubs from the Midwest played in New York City. They were shut out. Black clubs in Gotham, under the control of Nat Strong's monopolistic booking agency and the collusive practices of white owners at semi-pro clubs, excluded out-of-town teams from black baseball's most lucrative market. And John Connor, who really wanted to bring his team from Atlantic City into the New York City market, found a way. First, he met with Strong. In the middle quote, when the Bacharach execs met with Strong, the white promoter, Strong, told them that they were making things bad by offering these blankety blanks more money. The Chicago Defender's headline, "Slavery Still in Existence, even in New York," reflects the fact that black teams had no ability to break through. And Connors ended up by bypassing Nat Strong and negotiating a contract directly with the Oval's manager, Connie Savage. And Strong threatened retaliation, but those were, it never happened. The deal stood. And because of this, the Bacharach Giants arrive in 1919. And instead of 2,000, 3,000 people arriving from other places to see this team, 18,750 paid admissions for a doubleheader in July of 1919 to see the Bacharach Giants. Amazing. And according to the Chicago Defender, 10,000 of them, 10,000 people came from Harlem. And so Guy Empey welcomes the Harlem crowd. Not only is it good business, I think he really believed that this was the right thing to do. So in the Chicago Defender, they have published a statement from Guy Empey saying that Guy Empey, known from the Globe from one end to the other, told a sporting writer at Dyckman Oval last Sunday that race Harlem is welcome to his grounds. I am very democratic in my views, and while we all figure from the business point of view, I believe in treating a man as a man, regardless of his color. Race Harlem is welcome to Dyckman Heights at all times. So the Dyckman Oval started to get a reputation as being a place, an entry point into the New York market. And later that summer, even we thought that the Bacharach Giants that was a big crowd, but in August, the end of August, 25,000 came to see Rube Foster, who had was getting ready to begin the first Negro National League, and his Chicago American Giants came to the Dyckman Oval for a doubleheader. 4 Hall of Famers on this team. And then the Hilldale team from outside of Philadelphia, from Derby. And here we can actually see they're playing the Treat 'em Roughs, and Bill Kerwin talks about the differences between the Negro League teams and their white counterparts. The game played by African-American players relied on speed, offered entertainment as a bonus, but rather than the static dependence on power hitting and home runs that the Major League depended on, Negro baseball utilized speed, bunting, hit and run, and more exciting baseball, in his opinion. And in 1920, yet the ownership, it's not the ownership, it's the leaseholder, changes yet again, and ex-major leaguer Jeff Tesreau and Connie Savage take over the lease because of the previous year, 1919, and these games that drew 10 times what the Oval could hold. They decided to try to expand the Oval. It will be enlarged for the 1920 season, says the Chicago Defender. To say the least, it is needed. It has not only been uncomfortable for hundreds of spectators who paid good money and couldn't find a seat, it was also hard for the outfielders because the crowd, there was no outfield. There were grandstands, but there was no outfield fence. So people were standing outside, and perhaps an outfielder is trying to run down a fly ball and runs into a person, a spectator. And in 1920, Foster realized that this was really going to be a good business move if he could get his teams into the Dyckman Oval. And so Rube Foster gets together with Connie Savage, with all the big shots, and has what's called sort of like a peace conference to try and book regular games into the Oval. And many of the Western teams under Rube's control, he had just founded this Negro National League. They negotiated to have them play after June on Sundays and Saturdays at the Dykeman Oval. So there would be teams that there was great demand to see these teams come into town and see the players that people were reading about. The agreement, the Chicago Defender says, will bring the majority of the new Negro National League teams to the Dykeman Oval to play against Jeff Tesreau's team. And so with this agreement, baseball explodes. An explosion at baseball in 1920. Just take a look at these marquee things. These are the Cubans, the Bacharach Giants, the Easton team, Norfolk Giants, Baltimore Black Sox, Lincoln Giants. So amazing 1920 explosion of baseball, and they became most people really loved it, and they were very popular in Harlem. And here, in the New York Age, games were an event. A goodly portion of the 110,000 souls living between 125th and 145th followed this team, and they were all there. It didn't matter who you were: doctor, boot black, bartender, soldiers, ex-bartenders, sailors, Sunday school teachers, even. Every Broadway Uptown Express, the #1 train to reach the Dykeman Street Station, brought more and more people, a throng, the endless stream pouring into the ballpark. And even 2 out of 3 cars in sight were making their way up and back, dropping off new spectators and going back to Harlem for a fresh load of people. The Black Sox, Oscar Charleston, Louis Santop, Hall of Famers, Bacharach Giants come and defeat the Baltimore Black Sox. And at the end of 1920, Babe Ruth makes his first appearance at the Oval after completing his first season as a Yankee. He pitched in relief. He hit 2 homers in the first game before 5,000 fans. He had just set a major league record at the time that season, 54 home runs. And this, after he played here, that's when he made that quote about bunting a home run. The Lincoln Giants come and play the New York Giants, who are barnstorming after the 1920 season, and they defeat the New York Giants 4-1. Joe Williams strikes out 13 New York Giants in this game. George Kelly, the Hall of Famer, is playing on the New York Giants that day. And this is what the Oval looked like in 1921 from the air. We can see sort of a 1/3, 1/4 built neighborhood. There are a few apartment buildings. And now we can actually see grandstands between the blue border of the park. And in the outfield fence, it looks like it's just fence posts. It doesn't look like a wall, but you can see there's a right field wall and a left field wall, and then grandstands. Further improvements at the Oval. A gang of men it gets to work improving the grounds and getting the stadium into condition. This is a picture. There are very few. This is the only one I found of Jeff Testro's Bears, the team, in 1921. So Jeff is the second from the left in the back row. You can see his name, Jeff, over it. And so this is his team. He had retired from Major League Ball, and this is how he's making his living these days. John Connor comes in 1921 with his team. This is a photo of the 1921 Atlantic City Backrack Giants. So these are the guys that came to play at the Oval, or at least most of them. And it's become such a big deal that now the mayor is going to come. Mayor Hyland attends a game at Dyckman Oval versus Alex Pompus's Cuban Stars. He, of course, expects to be let in for free. They ask him for his ticket. The article is really kind of funny. And then when it comes to throwing out the first pitch, he threw 3 first pitches and he threw strikes. All of them thrown over the plate with considerable speed. And he had a good time because a few months later, he came back. And here he comes back to shake Rube Foster's hand at the end of 1921 in October. Mayor Hyland shook hands with Rube Foster and several other visiting Chicago players at Dyckman Oval. So now we've reached 1927, and this is an unusual photo taken from down on the Oval from Fort George. So you can see Sherman Creek and how close the ballpark is. You can really imagine that if it weren't for the bulkheads there, the tide would be flooding in there a couple times a day. And now we can see by the end of the 20s, Inwood is starting to become filled with apartment buildings. You can also see that it's currently set up for soccer. You can see the goalposts. The Bronx Lincoln Giants, usually in the 1920s, they were playing at the Catholic Protectory Oval in the Bronx. But here, for at least the later part of the 1928 season and part of the 1929 season, there's an announcement in the New York Daily News that the Bronx Giants are playing at the Dyckman Oval as their home grounds. So we've got the Backrack Giants, 1919, 1920, Chicago American Giants visiting. Now we have the Lincoln Giants. Charlie Smith, Pop Lloyd, Connie Rector. Playing in 1929. And in 1932, the Black Yankees begin their season with Dyckman Oval as the home field. First, they train at Baker Field, and then they move into Dyckman Oval. And this is when the Crawfords come from Pittsburgh to play against the Black Yankees. This team had 6 future Hall of Famers, if I counted right. And the Black Yanks winning against the Detroit Wolves, visiting from the Midwest. And even more Hall of Famers there. Black Yankees were on a hot streak, won 8 games. But later that year, not that far into the season really, in June, they got screwed by the Dyckman Oval management. And I'm not even really going to talk about the Dyckman Oval management and ownership, but the ownership was completely dysfunctional, filled with countersuits and suits. They sued each other for 20 years, and that's probably why the Oval lasted as long as it did as a stadium, because the owners had this internecine battles that were unsportsmanlike compared to what was going on there. So it's always about money. And the Yanks had, wait a minute, not the the Black Yankees and the Crawfords were playing, and with Satchel Paige, who struck out 13. Josh Gibson went 5 for 5 with a homer and 2 doubles. And then they got paid $7 a person because that's what management said. Management said, nobody's here. Nobody came to the game. And yet they could see that the stands are filled. So the Black Yankees say, screw this. We can't play when management cheats us. And that was the end of that season, ended prematurely. 1933, the end of Prohibition. Anticipating repeal, a bar goes into next to the locker room at the Dyckman Oval, the beer garden. Nice picture. That's on Academy Street. And here's what the stadium looked like. Now we can actually see that Inwood in 1933 is a built neighborhood. So it's just a matter of putting on the finishing touches. And soon the population will be about 50,000 people. Now the high drama of Nat Strong. Nat Strong, again, he's been controlling baseball for 20 years, keeping black teams out or wanting to control who plays where, except at the Oval. He's been a good pal of Alejandro Pompez, according to what I've read. And now Alex Pompez wants to join the new iteration of the Negro National League. He wants to change his Cuban Stars to become the New York Cubans. And Strong was against this. And going into this highly charged negotiation, right before it, suddenly Nat Strong dies of what appears to have been a heart attack. Suddenly, January 11th. January 10th, he dies of a heart attack, busy fighting. Pompez will be Nat Strong, and now suddenly he's gone. The barrier to a new home team at the Dyckman Oval disappears. Alex Pompez's team becomes a league entry team, and because of this, he decides to renovate the stadium to really be a fitting stadium for a major league team. So as soon as he got the okay that he was in the league, he had engineers and architects looking over Dyckman Oval, really thinking about enlarging it, doubling the size, maybe even more than doubling the size to a capacity of 12,000 people, improving the playing field, improving the players' accommodations, and increasing the size of the field. He didn't want it to be a bandbox anymore. He wanted it to be a normal, or at least a bigger size, respectable field. And so here he's in the New York Age. They say Senor Pompez has so completely renovated the Dyckman Oval that fans will not recognize it. It's been made over, steamrolled. It looks like big league diamonds. But the big important thing that this news article mentions is that he's acquired a lease. A let was acquired and the fence moved back, because the Dyckman Oval only took up 3 of those building lots of the 5 on the block. And here we can see what he did. From 1917 to 1934, on the upper right, this is the outline of the old stadium, with the 2 lots that were not included in the ball field from that block. And you can see on the lower right, the 2 lots that Alex Pompez signed leases on. So he's increased the size of his ballpark by a considerable amount, 20%, 30%. And so now he can put bleachers further up the left field line. His outfield goes back. And so on the left, you can sort of see what the field is, where the field was, superimposed over today's Google Maps view. And this is the famous photograph of the Dyckman Oval Stadium, taken from Nagel Avenue, the entrance at Academy and Nagel. And this shows the night lights that Pompez installed so that he could have night games. And as a matter of fact, the very first Manhattan professional baseball night games were held here at Dyckman Oval. They were earlier in Brooklyn, earlier elsewhere, but for Manhattan, this was the first night games were held here for New York Cubans games. Opening day, a very exciting day, a parade. Hall of Famer Martin Dihigo is in the lineup. The Homestead Grays come and win. They beat the Cubans, but the Cubans are just getting started. And the first half of the season, they were sort of iffy, but then they came on real strong in the second half. Subway Series in June, the Brooklyn Eagles come and split a doubleheader with the Cubans at Dyckman Oval. And Etha Manley, the team's operations manager and eventually the team owner, she's the only woman in the Hall of Fame now as the owner and manager, general manager of the Brooklyn team. I forgot to mention, and this is remiss of me, that Alejandro Pompez's goal for all of his teams was to use Latin American talent as much as possible, and from the Dominican Republic as much as possible. So many of his players are from the DR. They became known that season of 1935 as the Latins from Manhattan. Alejandro Pompez eventually became known as for his scouting duties for the Giants later, as opening a pipeline of Latin American talent into the major leagues. And for that, not because he was the owner of the New York Cubans, but because of this pipeline that he opened for the Latin American players, he was elected to the Hall of Fame. I love this photo because there's so few photos of the Dyckman Oval, but here we can see in the background of these two players, Fats Jenkins and Bill Yancey at the Oval, we can see the apartment building that's on the corner of 204th Street and Nagel Avenue. And when I took that photo, I thought that building looked familiar, and there we go. So here we are, these two players looking now from 1935 or 1936 at the Oval. Not many pictures of the interior of the Oval. But the Cubans played great. And so they made it to the World Series. They won games 1, 2, and 4. Games 1 and 3 of the 1935 National League or League World Series were at the Dyckman Oval. And then Pittsburgh won the series 4-3. And then Babe Ruth came back at the end of the season. This is the end of his career now. Matter of fact, he had just retired. He had been traded to Boston, and that was done. And now he was barnstorming. This was his last New York appearance since retiring in May 1935. And the New York Amsterdam News thought he was just a shadow of himself. And they said the so-called semi-pro and minor league white ball teams have absolutely no business in the same town with top flight Negro teams, to say nothing of the same ball yard at the same time. And here's the view from the train. So we can actually see the number 1 train actually goes along the left field line of the Oval. 1936, Satchel Paige versus Chet Brewer in the season opener. And the Black Yankees are coming back to the Oval. Alejandro Pompez was in a little bit of legal difficulty. He ran a numbers business, and New York City was cracking down on that kind of thing. Not only that, he was pressured from the side of law enforcement, but he's also pressured from the mob. Dutch Schultz wanted in on his business, and so his team, he couldn't be around all the time. So the Black Yankees, who were owned by Bill Bojangles Robinson and James Semler, took over the lease and started to share the Dyckman Oval. Look at this. This is a photo that once COVID is done, I would love to see if an original exists of Buck Leonard hitting a home run in the Dyckman Oval in 1936. I can't wait to actually go to archives again. In 1937, Pompez fled the country. He had to, because feds were coming to arrest him, and then he actually had to come back, and he testified, and no jail time for him. But the team had to fold. So the New York Cubans had to sort of disband. Later, they were sort of put back together again briefly in an unofficial way, and they came back to the Oval, but they were no longer in the Negro National League that year. So it was time for the Black Yankees to shine. Here's a photo of them at Dyckman Oval, 1937. One of the only interior views that you can actually make out of the seating arrangement. This is from May. And later towards the end of the season, the Black Yanks weren't going to compete that year for a championship. But in the last game of the season, on September 8th, they defeated the Washington Elite Giants. And that's about the end of the baseball story at the Oval. For now, we're going to talk a little bit about football. And here's the last image of the Dyckman Oval from the air, 1937. It's actually set up for a football game. This is taken around Thanksgiving. The last football game was played on Thanksgiving there in 1937. And Fritz Pollard was the coach of the Brown Bombers football team. He had played for Brown University, played in the Rose Bowl, played for the Akron Pros during the inaugural year of the NFL, was Akron's coach in 1921. Then he retired in 1926. I've read he was the first of many things in the NFL. And then in 1935, somebody hired him to coach a team of black professionals and college stars at the Dyckman Oval because the NFL had banned black athletes. In 1934, all black athletes who had contracts, their contracts were up. No black athletes were signed again until 1947, when a team in Los Angeles signed a black player. And so in between, this was sort of something that Pollard decided it was important for football fans to know that black players had top talent, and this BS thing that the NFL was doing was BS. So Pollard is pretty well known nowadays, and even in this season, Bill Belichick wore a patch that says Fritz Pollard on his visor in the first game of the season. You can see it on the right, and he even said how much he admired it. They were great players. They just weren't in the NFL. So the Bombers contracted to play at the Dyckman Oval in Pompez's brand new renovated arena. This is 1935, 36, 37. They were really popular with the Harlem crowd again. And here in the New York Amsterdam News, this great quote. I'm going to try to pronounce that word at the end right. If you make up your mind to attend one of their Sunday gridiron matinees at Dyckman Oval, it is suggested that you bring along your copy of Who's Who in Colored America. That is, if you don't recognize all the celebrities, political big shots, social lions, dowagers, and pulchritudinous debutantes on site, it was the place to be, the Dyckman Oval, for a Brown Bombers game. Here's some programs, 1936. Other players, that's Joe Lillard on the cover, the star player. One of the things that the Brown Bombers did was sing spirituals when they came to the line. And in the Sports Illustrated from 2003, there's this great description of what it felt like to hear this team play. And Dan Coyle says, as kickoff approached, the Bombers swung into their warm-up drills. The crowd heard familiar shouting of signals, and then another sound, less familiar, a low, almost mournful call that rose in time with the team's movements and echoed off the wooden grandstand, so unexpected that it took spectators a moment to understand. The Bombers were singing spirituals to themselves. The crowd listened, and some began to sing along, their voices floating towards the distant downtown skyline. And this is something that in Fritz Pollard's biography is mentioned. Okay, the 1937 season, more of that's Dixie Matthews there. There's a new, the Brown Bombers didn't make money. They drew a lot of people, but they also had great expenses. So the end of the season, everybody thinks 1938 is going to be another great season, but Alex Pompez's lease was over at the end of 1937. He had a 3-year lease. 1938, the lease is up. He's still sort of in legal limbo, and the stadium is demolished. Here we can see February 3rd, the California Eagle in Los Angeles reports that sports enthusiasts grew maudlin this week as workmen commenced the destruction of the Dyckman Oval. In a week or so, the field will be just another empty lot. After 20 years of incredible sports, it turned into a parking lot. In 1948, New York City used its power of eminent domain to condemn the lot where the Dyckman Oval was, and plenty of the property below it, all the way to Dyckman Street. And in 1951, a new public housing project opened, the Dyckman Houses. The old Dyckman Oval area is circled. And the last thing we're going to do tonight is use a little georeferencing or map warping to locate the stadium today, so that if you wanted to visit home plate, where would you go? This is the 1930 Bromley Real Estate Atlas. It shows Dyckman Oval, but it doesn't show any of the infrastructure. So in 1935, the Sanborn, it'll load. Come on, there you go. The Sanborn Atlas shows the stadium and the locker room. And so you can actually sort of see where along between Nagel Avenue and Amsterdam, which is 10th Avenue, Academy Street and 204th Street. We're going to line this up just right and go to the next slide of 1955, after the Dyckman houses have been built. And this overlay, we're using Nagel Avenue and Academy Street and 10th Avenue. All the streets are locking us into the exact dimensions. Now, today, Nagel Avenue is much wider than it used to be. There are parking lots to the Dyckman houses that are where the old sidewalk used to be. And so this final slide shows us how the baseball field overlaps today's geography. And we can see that you can see the IRT #1 train between the yellow dotted lines. That's Nagel Avenue, and the blacked out area is the stadium itself. Much of the stadium is in a would be in a parking lot. Home plate is in a parking lot, which is really good because it means it's not in the middle of a building. You could go there, you could go visit home plate of the Dyckman Oval, and some of us did this a few months ago, measured out the diamond. It was really fun. But we've talked a ton about how these are teams of players who were not allowed to be in the major leagues, and yet their skills were of major league caliber. And for decades, this was not really acknowledged until December of last year. Just a few months ago, Major League Baseball officially designated that the Negro leagues between 1920 and 1948 can be considered the major leagues, and that statistics from those games would be folded into the major league record. So that means we didn't talk really about all of the leagues that were part of the Negro leagues, but there's the Negro National League, Eastern, American, East-West, Southern, Negro National League 2, and American. These are all now being folded into the statistics of Major League Baseball, which is so fitting. one last slide. I told you that we went, and you can sort of imagine where home plate was, and this is sort of a reenactment of Josh Gibson being pitched to where things would be now. And so to mix the past with the present, this is our last slide, and so this is sort of how to sum up. How do you sum it up? The history of this place is so important. And it almost disappeared. And really, thanks to digital online scanning of newspapers, and thanks to archives going online, this is a whole new field that can be saved from really being forgotten. I guess that's where I'm going to finish. And I went too long, didn't I? I'm noticing that. Sorry.
That's fine. All right.
I have time for questions.
Yes, thank you. That was fantastic, and always exciting to hear your talks, and great to hear a little bit more about. Oh, Don, where did you go? We can't see.
I'm here.
Oh, your video is not on.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yep. Anyway, great to always learn more about our local Inwood history. So, and especially the stuff that not everyone knows. So it's great.
I'm ready for any questions if there's time for that.
Absolutely. I wonder why your camera's not working.
I don't know. I can see myself.
All right.
Better or worse.
I'll get started. So do you know if Jim Thorpe ever played at the Dyckman Oval?
I don't know, but I do know that Fritz Pollard played against him. But no, I don't know about the Dyckman Oval.
Okay. The next question is, and it looks like everyone else can see you, just I can't, Don, so I think you're fine. The next question is, did the Newark Eagles, oh, now I see you. Did the Newark Eagles ever play at the Dyckman Oval?
I think so. My baseball brain is not an overloaded thing. And so I have done that kind of research, but it doesn't just bubble up.
Okay.
Actually, next week, I'm going to be giving a longer talk for the New York Adventure Club, almost twice as long, or at least probably an hour and a half. And so it might turn up there.
Okay.
But I think that they did play those teams. Yeah.
Okay.
From Newark.
Okay. So this next question, I think they're talking about the lease for the property for the Dyckman Oval.
Yeah.
It says, when you say that the lease was, quote, taken over, was it legally contracted or an illegal takeover?
In 1938?
I think there were a couple of times when you talked about turnover.
Yeah. These were, the leaseholders were not the owners. The owners were, there are half a dozen, between 6 and 10 people, always fighting and suing each other. And it's a talk in itself. But these were apparently leases that were signed with the owners. So when Guy MP took out a lease, I think that he took it out with the owners to have baseball games every Saturday or something like that. Maybe that he wasn't the leaseholder on Tuesdays, that could have been used for soccer or high school sports or something like that. But the prime leaseholder, when there's one piece of evidence when Jeff Tesreau took over the lease, in the New York Times, they published business transactions. And in the New York Times, they did publish that year, 1921, I guess, that he had paid $5,000 to the corporation that owned the Oval. And so I'm guessing that means it was a $5,000 lease for the season for him. That's a lot of money then. So these are leases that are signed with the ownership. And I don't think they're assigned, but that's very difficult not to crack, finding out those facts.
Okay. Okay, the next question is, what is the connection between Cuba and baseball? Why that island in particular?
Oh, I don't know. It's a fun game. It's summer all year.
Someone says, I think this was a question from early on in the presentation, that they saw some sort of reference to Morris as a, quote, Indian. Do you know what that might be in reference to?
Say that again.
Some sort of reference early on in your talk to Morris as a, quote, Indian.
That might have been in a newspaper article.
I think it was.
One of those first games when they're saying who's playing for this team and who's playing. If I could navigate back to that slide, I could find it. But I don't know.
We can come back to it. That's fine. The next question is, do you know if Ken Burns ever covered any of this history in his documentaries?
Not that I know of. I've done a ton of Googling, and I don't get hits for anything that comes back to his show. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I don't think anyone's Googled Dyckman Oval more than me. You think that it would come up. I've gone to anyway. I don't think so. And I think that part of the reason is that the newspaper databases are scattered. Not everybody has all of the newspapers, that most newspapers didn't report the action. It's just a few, the New Amsterdam News, the New York Age, the Chicago Defender, a few others for certain other events. And so those are prime sources. Finding photos, and then in the last 10 or 20 years, the Negro League scholarship has just exploded. And so there's so many more researchers out there looking for information about things just like this. Mm. But when was Ken Burns' series? It was at least 10 years ago, wasn't it?
I think it was in the 90s.
Yeah, so that was right at the beginning of the increase in interest, I think. I could be wrong.
Do you know if there are any historical signs or murals in the area, or has there been any conversation with the city about marking the area in some way?
Well, I would love to see that happen, but it hasn't happened yet. Perhaps talks like this can widen the appreciation for the site. And then somebody who has an idea of how to make something happen might get interested in doing that. It would be really easy because home plate, and there is a home plate at the Hilltop Stadium near 168th Street, and where the Polo Grounds used to be. There's a marker on one of the stairways that used to go down to there. And so there are historic markers for baseball, and Hinchliffe Stadium in New Jersey and Dexter Park out in Queens, they have markers. And so it's not, there's precedent, and it just takes the doing. It would be easy to put a marker here because it's a parking lot already. There's nothing that, it could be flat, it could be in the pavement. People would know immediately what it is. Of course, there are all kinds of things you could do. And I do think it's a worthy thing to pursue. Nothing that I know of is happening.
Okay, the next question was the seating integrated at the Dyckman Oval? And has Cooperstown shown any interest in this history, especially since Hall of Famers played there?
I've never seen a written record or any source talking about seating. So there's just so much I don't know. I mean, I know a lot, but not that. And when it comes to Cooperstown, the photo of the two players with that apartment building on 204th Street right behind them, that came from the Hall of Fame's library. They're one of their online photos. So I don't think that there's nobody paying attention. Maybe the fact that Dyckman Oval has only been recently studied is something that it's an emerging subject. There's one great article online by Rory Costello for the SABR Group, the Society of American Baseball Research, that he does a fantastic job. Oh, I should probably turn to some sources. I'll do that. Hang on. Trying to find, there we go. All right, so when you come back to my screen, there's some sources if you'd like.
I think you need to share it again.
Oh, okay. Ha! Let's not do that. It crashed. Are you still there?
Yep, I'm here.
All
okay,
right.
I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
Someone says, what was the most famous boxing match in the field?
Oh, well, there were, I didn't even mention boxing. Gene Tunney fought there a few times. Well, he comes to mind, but he's not alone. Boxing was something that happened constantly from, not constantly, in the 1920s, early 21, 22, tons of boxing. And then later, a lot of boxing. Trying to remember names of boxers. I have my head in baseball. But I'll tell you what, if you go to Google, Cole Thompson has done a movie about the Dyckman Oval, and in his movie, it's on YouTube. So if you go to Cole Thompson and Dyckman Oval, or you'll find it on YouTube, and he sort of emphasizes boxing in his film, along with the legal difficulties of Alex Pompez and the mob and that kind of drama, which I didn't even touch on this. So if you want to fill in those empty blanks about boxing or Alex Pompez's numbers, game, business, check out Cole's movie.
Great. That's a great resource. Thank you. All right. Well, I think I've gone through all of the questions. So thank you, Don. This was great. I'm always happy to hear one of your talks.
Thank you.
I hope whenever someone else is posting stuff about Cole. So I hope everyone enjoyed the talk. I hope you will consider making a donation to the organization so that we can continue to have programs like this. As I mentioned, gifts in any amount are very much appreciated. I also want to remind you that this was the second in our series of 6 lectures in our Talking About Race Matters series. So please join us here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. on Crowdcast. Be sure to register through the links provided on our social media. And we'll see you back here next week, February 17th at 6 p.m. for Zora Neale Hurston and Cora Belpre, Pioneers of Black and Latinx Folk Culture in Upper Manhattan by Dr. Will Walker. Thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone. And thanks, Meredith, for having me.
Thanks for doing this.